All right, so most of you have probably read my bio. The simple facts are I left university with a PhD. The topic of my dissertation was industrialization in Africa, in Ghana in particular. Went to work for Arthur Andersen for a couple of years and then spent 13 years at McKinsey. Just left McKinsey at the beginning of this year. Those are kind of the headlines. Now, the real story for why I'm here is that I'm passionate about building leaders. And my journey down this path actually started about 4 years ago. I was a partner at McKinsey. I was working in Libya on oil and gas. And at the end of the year, I was sitting down with my evaluator. At McKinsey, we get evaluated every year, even as partners. If we don't do well, we're asked to leave. And my evaluator said to me, Rajiv, it's going fine. You're doing well, your billings are good, teams love you. But I don't see the passion in you. And moreover, although your teams love working with you, they don't see the passion in you. So what are you up to in life? Whose dream are you living? Literally said it in those words. And for me, that was a shock. Because actually, for most of my life, I'd been living someone else's dream. I'd been living my parents' dream for most of my younger childhood, doing a PhD because my parents wanted me to. Those of you who come from Indian backgrounds will appreciate the pressure on that. And for most of my years at McKinsey, I was living McKinsey's dream, not my own. So it forced me to really think, like, what am I here for? What is my passion? What is my purpose? And over the next few years, I realized that it was in leadership development. So one of the things I did within McKinsey, I started teaching within McKinsey. And in the last 2 years, I was co-responsible for leadership development. And as part of that journey, I met a man called Mark Rittenberg. And some of you here will know Mark Rittenberg. He is a lecturer at Haas. I invited him to come and teach one day at McKinsey. And he is very different from me. Does anyone know Mark in this room? So I met Mark, and he was really out there for me. Like in McKinsey, I was kind of the steady Eddie guy, got the right answer for the client, nothing exceptional. Mark was way out there, but there's something about him that I found interesting. We kept in touch, and then 4 years later, he said, look, why don't you come and teach with me? So I flew over to Berkeley. I had no idea what business schools actually did. I'd never done an MBA myself, and I found it truly thrilling. And over the years, I got to know Mark, I got to know other people at Haas, and as of the beginning of this year, I'm formally a lecturer at Haas. Now, although I'm a lecturer, and it even says so here on my badge, I am not going to lecture with you today. We're going to do something very experiential. So although Jens said questions at the end, I'm going to break that rule just for this session, if it's okay. And I'd like you to just jump in and participate. And actually, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of exercises to do. And the topic we're going to explore today is trust. And I'm going to start by actually asking you, why is it important that we talk about trust as business leaders? Why is it important? Let's just get some answers. Why is it important? And there's microphones on the tables, on most of the tables. So just speak into the mic. Yeah. Great, it's the currency of our relationships. And if I had to say to you, but we work in hierarchical organizations, why do I need to build trust? Right. Who else? Why else is it important to talk about trust?
Sharing information.
Okay. So when trust is there, information gets more shared. What else?
It's an enabler for credibility.
It's an enabler for credibility. That's right. And that really hit me a year ago when I was teaching at West Point. And I knew nothing about the military. I don't particularly care about the military, but I was invited to go and teach. And the topic they wanted me to teach on was trust. And I was like, why do you want me to talk about trust? In the military, you're a hierarchical organization. The general tells the next level in command what to do, and so on and so forth. But actually, when I got into West Point, what I realized was for the soldier going into the battlefield, in a potentially life-threatening situation, yes, hierarchy is important, but trust in the person who's commanding you is even more important. That's what makes the difference when it's a true life and death situation. Now, is it getting more important or less important to build trust in today's world as leaders? Let me get a show of hands, people who think it's getting more important. Okay, the vast majority of you. Why is it getting more important? Yeah.
I mean, for me, with regards to the digital world, the authenticity of trust can actually be broken down. So
very quickly.
Saying one thing to an audience can actually be seen somewhere else as the authenticity can be yeah.
Right. So the digital world makes things much more transparent. What else? Yeah.
The speed of change increases, so trust is a glue to help not diverge too much.
Right. Absolutely. So as things change more rapidly, as the life cycle of ideas and products and services diminishes almost every year, you need to have that trust. Why else? Yep.
Also because relationships are much more virtual than before.
Right, yes, so we've moved from organizations where folks are co-located, often in some kind of hierarchy, to network organizations that are virtual. And in those virtual network organizations, trust is very important. I would personally argue that in the last 10 years, we've seen a fundamental breach of trust at virtually all levels. If you look at the populace versus governments, certainly in Europe, there's a big feeling of breach of trust. If you look at companies and workers, if you look at the financial crisis where some of the banks were investing millions in refurbishing offices while about to go bankrupt, and thousands of people losing their jobs, huge breach of trust. So I'd argue that actually it's more important than ever before to build that trust. So we're going to talk now about the components of trust. What is it that builds trust? And what I'd like you to do is just to partner up with the person next to you, or if you're in threes, go into a group of three. And I want you to think about a person in your life, in your business world, with whom you have a trust-based relationship. And just explore for a few minutes, what is it that that person does that helps build that trust with you? What is it that that person does that helps build trust with you? Okay? So just spend a few minutes doing that, and I'm going to pull some answers from the group. A few tables, and if you can pick up the mic while doing so. So can I ask this table just to share a few of the things that you heard about what people do to build trust?
Okay, I will say just one, maybe, or we'll ask for consistency of behavior.
Consistency of behavior. I'll put that under R. Yep. What else? A few other people from the table, maybe?
Delivering when they say they would.
Yep, delivering on promises. That's also under R.
Accessibility, responding within 24 hours.
Okay, accessibility. I would put that under self-orientation. Sorry, SO.
Shares information and opinions.
Shares information and opinions. Okay. I would put that under I. Let's put it under I. Could argue where it goes, but I'll put it under I for now. Shares information and opinions.
We also talked about the removal of threatening behaviour in that controlling of information, where it's being drip-fed to an employee, but it was more very open in that information. The opinions allowed the opinions to be shared, and to be challenged by that. So
Okay.
it wasn't that demonstrative behaviour.
Okay, so there's an openness or transparency. Let's put that under I as well. Let's move to another table. Let's move to this table. Here, what are some of the things that the people you talked about did that build trust? Can you use the microphone, please, just so we can get it on tape?
Having good references from others.
Good references from others. Let's put that under C.
Well, one thing we covered, but I think that's covered already, kind of establishing gentleman agreements and adhering to those, because you cannot possibly document everything.
So sticking to promises.
Yes.
Yep, so we put that under R.
Relationship based on listening.
Relationship based on listening.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So let's put that under I. What else?
We also said openness and transparency, which I think is already there.
Yep.
Exactly.
Just being open to subordinates that they have more knowledge than you in their area of expertise.
Okay, so let's put that under SO, openness to subordinates. Let's get one more table now. Let's just hear from this table some of the things that were going on in your minds as you thought about trust.
Well, when you trust.
Could you use the microphone, please? Thank you.
When you trust, you're actually making yourself vulnerable. So you're also
Okay.
trusting the other person not to abuse your vulnerability.
Okay, there's an element of vulnerability. Let's put that under self-oriented, SO, sorry. Any other thoughts on that table? And trust? candid. So let's put that under R. Okay. Anything else?
I'd just add to what Karen was saying about actually the other person's willingness to be vulnerable. So not just that it's okay for you to be vulnerable, but their willingness.
Okay, so it's vulnerability in both directions. So we'll put that under SO. Any last thoughts?
Ability to demonstrate the character of integrity, because once
Integrity.
you build that, the trust becomes the lubricant of all the processes that go on in the business and make things just much more smoother.
Okay, so there's something about integrity. Let's put that under SO. Okay, so what do these different boards mean? Thank you, Christy. I'll ask you to come back shortly for something else. Thank you.
Turn the letters.
So, what do these all mean? So,
Excuse me,
yeah. Yes, I'm going to reveal just now. These are the 4 elements of the so-called trust equation, which is a concept that was developed by David Meister about 20 years ago. How many of you are familiar with the trust equation? David Meister, trust equation. Okay, so David Meister was working in the context of professional services. And he asked himself the question, how do you become a trusted advisor to someone else? And in particular for engineers who find the concept of trust rather nebulous, and we all find trust a nebulous concept, what he tried to do was to frame it in an equation. So for the scientists among us, it's very simple to understand. Now take it for what it is. I think there's always an element in trust which you cannot put down to an equation, but take it for what it is and use it as a tool for reflection. So what Meister says is to build trust with someone, there are 4 key ingredients. The first one is credibility. So if you are a consultant advising a client on an oil and gas topic, you need to be credible. You need to know what you're talking about. And part of building that credibility sometimes comes from good references from others. When others say, yes, this person knows what he's talking about, that's a way of demonstrating credibility. And most leaders that build trust in some way have an element of credibility. The second element is reliability. And we've got some of the components there. It's consistency of behavior. It's sticking to promises. It's actually being candid, right? So what you see is what you get. That's an element of reliability. The third element is intimacy. Now, intimacy is typically about going beyond the content and being willing to explore the emotional space with someone else. And part of that is indeed about being open. There's an element of transparency in there, of sharing information, particular personal information about yourself. And then the 4th element is self-orientation, what Meister calls self-orientation. So if a relationship is all about you, okay, if you're self-oriented, then people will trust you less. Now, think about this in the context of a car salesman. If a car salesman comes up to you and tries to sell a car, and it's very obvious that it's all about selling the car, getting it off their balance sheet, and getting you to buy it, as someone who's buying the car, you're going to be a little bit reluctant. You're going to be a bit kind of, I'm not sure if this is in my interest or in his interest. Okay? If a investment banker, and I know there's a couple among you, comes to you as a CEO and says, oh, you should sell the business, we can IPO it, or you can sell it to a competitor, and it's obvious that it's only about getting the commission from the sale, in other words, it's about self-orientation, then your level of trust in that person will diminish. Okay? So having low self-orientation is absolutely key. Now, if you look at the equation, those of you who are good mathematicians will see that self-orientation is absolutely critical, because you can be great at credibility, reliability, and intimacy, but at the end of the day, if it's all about you, the level of trust goes down. Let me just pause here and get reflections. Does this resonate? Does this not resonate? Let me get some reflections. And let me ask a table that hasn't spoken yet. Maybe this table, actually. Any reflections? Here's the mic.
So I think, so for me, yeah, I think having the candidness, if I'm in a negotiation with someone, you gave the example about buying the car, then I'd rather someone was upfront with me and said, clearly there's an element of self-interest on both parts. You want to get the best deal, I want to sell this to you, but that's no reason why there couldn't be a mutual
Right.
Win-win scenario there, as long as there's that trust and understanding that it's not in one direction.
That's right. So let me just reflect on that, because there is always an element of self-orientation in everything we do. So as a consultant, I'm there helping a client. There is always an element of like, so what's going to happen next with this relationship? But if it's only about you and selling the next project, then in the long term, you're not going to build trust. There needs to be something about looking at the world from their perspective and really understanding what's in it for them and being able to help them and find that win-win situation. Yeah.
I was trying to frame this in context of the reciprocity aspect of trust, in terms of, you know, to be trustworthy, to be trusted, you have to be trusting as well. Just curious your thoughts on.
Okay, and where does that fit in?
Yeah, how do you frame the equation from that standpoint? I'm just thinking about it. I don't
Reciprocity of trust. What do you guys think? So I can give my perspective. Anyone have a perspective on that? Yeah. Can you use the mic, Jens?
Of course. I think that resonates very... On? No. I think that resonates very nicely with my experience, because one key element is A, reciprocity, but also the assumptions you make there. Because the way I tried to build trust once, I was completely wrong about what you've done with psychiatry. And he didn't trust me because I was speaking. Sorry, shut up.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Any other thoughts from this table? Or maybe from the back there? Yeah. Can you speak into the mic? Is there a mic there? There's one mic just in front of you here. There you go.
Is that working? Yeah. So just taking the reciprocity angle and trying to fit it into the equation, I would almost say that fits into intimacy, where it builds up the relationship when it is really two-way and you get into the zone with the other person, you just know that you're resonating really well with them, then that is a level of intimacy, and that's probably what Meister was getting at.
I think there's intimacy. I think it also fits into self-orientation. Because being willing to give without the immediate expectation that you're getting something back is typically a sign of low self-orientation. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Maybe just a reflect. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Just a reflection of self-orientation. I think to me it's really one of the key ingredients. I think too many managers or people very often lose trust because they are too self-oriented. And I had not thought about that criteria when we discussed earlier, but I think this is really a key one that myself and others should pay attention to, likely more than we do in general.
Indeed, and if you believe in the equation, it is the most important thing, because you can be brilliant at all the rest, but it's self-orientation that really kills it. It really hit me when I got elected partner. I had a coach who interviewed all of my clients, and he used the trust equation to actually interview them. And when I was thinking about myself, I was reflecting about myself, where am I strong? I thought, well, actually it'll be on intimacy and self-orientation. So I'm generally good at building relationships with people quickly, and I always prided myself that I wasn't after the next project. I always said to myself, I'm here to help this individual. When I did the survey, or when the coach did the survey, I received a shock. Namely that the clients I'd worked with said, yes, you're intimate, but no, you have very high self-orientation. So when I'm sitting in front of you, it feels like you're here to sell the next McKinsey project. And actually, your reliability is pretty poor, because you promise to do stuff and you kind of just about get it done all the time. It's always last minute. Doesn't quite feel like you're totally on top of it. It was a fascinating revelation for me in terms of where I thought I was versus where other people thought I was. Yep, do you have a... Was that raising the hand? No, it wasn't. Okay. I'd like to get a show of hands among folks like ourselves, and I'd say we're professionals, folks who have been to business school, universities. What do you think is the strongest suit? I'd like to ask if you think it's credibility. What is typically our strongest suit as professionals? Can you put up your hands if you think it's credibility? Okay, it's roughly a third. What about reliability? Okay, so maybe a quarter. Intimacy? Ah, no hands go up. Okay. So we're going to work on that. We're going to work on that just now. What about self-orientation? Self-orientation? Strongest suit? For half of us, half of one person. It's the strongest suit. All right. I actually want to show you a little bit of data that we collected from a group of folks who came to the Advanced Manager Bootcamp. And the way to read this is we had a 360-degree survey. And of the population, there was about 50 folks who came on this program. You can see here what the strongest suit of these people were. In this case, it was reliability, with self-orientation and credibility coming second and third, and indeed intimacy not coming up very high. And then the weakest suit, by far, was indeed intimacy. Okay? So we're going to work now on intimacy. And I'd like to do that by putting forward a small dilemma. And maybe this is a dilemma for tonight. And take a read. I hope you can all read if you're in the background. And I'm going to ask Christy, who's not dressed in a beautiful black dress, but nevertheless dressed very well, to come forward and help me if you could. And we're going to do... So here's the situation. It's Saturday night. You're about to go to that big black tie event. It's really important for you and your spouse. All your colleagues are going to be there. All the key people in London society is going to be there. And it's gone 6 p.m. and your spouse says to you, "Oh dear, I've left the black dress at the dry cleaners." Can someone tell me how important the black dress is? Is it important? Is this an important situation or not?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Why do you assume my spouse wears a black dress?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. And why don't you take of it what you want to? So if there's an alternative situation that has significance, use that to think about this. Yeah? Okay. But this is an important situation. This is not just an everyday situation. So I want to ask you, like, what is the first response that comes to mind when you hear your spouse telling you this? And it could be an analogous situation, but what's your first response? There's no right answer, but let's get maybe, which of the tables, maybe that last table over there. Can we just get some answers? Yeah. Can you pass the mic up to that table, please? And I'm going to categorize these answers, and I'll come back and tell you what the categorization means. There's no right or wrong answer, by the way.
This is a pain in the arse, but from having been married for a number of years, one knows that you actually have to defer to the getting the dress thing sorted out because it's going to kill you.
Okay, so what do you literally... Okay, so no, but let's keep it there. What was your first response? What would you literally say to your spouse?
I would have a silent eye roll, but that wouldn't be seen.
A silent eye roll. Okay, so... silent eye roll. I've not heard that one before. Let's put it over here. Number 3. Okay, what else? At the back there.
What's another choice?
What's another choice? Yeah, let's put that as number 2. What else?
How are we going to solve this?
How are we going to solve this? Number 2. Yes. What else?
How do we get to the dry cleaners as soon as possible?
How do we get to the dry cleaners as soon as possible? Great question. Let's go to this table. Let's get some answers from this table.
So I would say, don't worry.
This table. Yep.
Yeah, I would say, don't worry, honey. It's not about the color of the dress; it's how you wear it.
Aha. So put that as number 1. Don't worry, honey. What else?
The same thing. Don't worry, honey. It's just a black tie event. It's not a black dress event.
Okay, so actually let's split that into 2. Don't worry, we'll put that as number 1. And then for number 2, we're going to put it's a black tie event, not a black dress event. Yep. Pass. Okay. Anything else? There's no right or wrong answer here, guys, girls.
Yes. Yep. The initial one would either be oh dear or oh shit, depending upon
Depending upon
Oh
number.
dear, oh shit, we're going to put that as number 3. What else? Yep.
Thank God I didn't want to go either.
Thank God I didn't want to go either. Okay. That's a good one. That goes in here. Yeah. What else?
Wear something else.
Wear something else. Yeah. You know, why don't you wear those black trousers instead? Yeah. Wear something else. I'm going to put that here. What else? It's going to be fun anyway. Let's put that as number 1. Yeah. Let's go buy one. Yep. Let's put that as number 2. I go alone. We'll put that as number 2. I go alone. What else?
I would say, because for her it's such a big matter, I would say, for example, something like, I love that particular pink dress, to give her the confidence again that he is solving the problem for her.
Okay.
Because for her it's a big thing right now.
Okay.
So you say, wear that particular pink dress that you wore a month ago and you look so lovely, or whatever. You solve the situation right away with something else.
Great. So let's solve the situation with a pink dress in number 2. Yep. Can I ask, what's the most empathetic response you can give in this situation? Yeah. Did you actually want to go? Oh, interesting question. Yeah. Let's put that as number 3. Yeah.
There could be an opportunity for renorming. If you said that the Academy Awards are a black tie event and most women do not wear black dresses, we're okay.
Great. So the reframe. This is PFPS in action. That's why we do PFPS. You see, it helps you in your day-to-day life. So we put that as number 1, basically. Number 1. Yeah. 2 more answers, and then I'll tell you what the framework means. Yeah. Is there a friend you can borrow a dress from? Maybe your sister's got a dress we can borrow. Okay. Yep. I'll take off my tie, so you can wear something else, and we'll be fine. Yeah. So that's number 1. There's a few more responses. What's the most empathetic response you can imagine in the situation? Let's say your spouse is in tears. How could you? Yeah, so that's number 1. Now, so that's one side of the equation. Now, what if you go into the other side of the spectrum, the most empathetic response you can think of in this situation? This isn't a problem. You'll be fine. Actually, let's put that as number 1. Yeah. Great, yeah. Let's put that as number 4. That must be frustrating. Yeah. Okay, so let me tell you what this framework means. Thanks again, Christy. And this framework comes from a Harvard academic called Bob Keegan. And he basically says, in a situation like this, where there is clearly emotion, you can respond in one of 5 different ways in general. The first way is by what he calls "don't feel that way" messages, often with good intentions. So this is saying things like, don't worry, it's going to be fine. Or it's okay, you know, I never liked going to that party anyway. What you're doing by saying that is often very well intentioned, but it's not actually connecting to the emotion at the moment. And the emotion at the moment is one of distress on your spouse's part. So there's an emotion of distress, and you'll simply say, oh, don't worry about that, it's going to be fine. We often say it with very good intentions. But if you're on the receiving end, it rarely makes you feel any better. Okay? That's one potential response. A second response is responses to fix the problem. Now, this is what we're all extremely good at doing. As professionals, we are hardwired to fix problems. And you can see we've got a rich array of answers in terms of what we can do to fix this problem. We can call the dry cleaner. We can ask your sister. We can ask your friend. You can go in a black trousers. You know, I'll take off my tie. You know, whatever. A wide variety of responses. And these are all responses to fix the problem at hand. But again, they're not responses that connect with the emotion in the moment. And that's fine. At some point, you do need to solve the problem. But to connect with the emotion in the moment, you could go, and this is now number 4. So it's acknowledging the feeling in some way by saying, gosh, you must feel frustrated. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it may simply be to look at your spouse and give her a hug, which is essentially saying, I hear you. I hear your pain. It's not making any judgment. It's just saying, I hear you. Okay? That's one way of responding. Now, an even more, let's say, sophisticated way of responding with empathy is to explain how you understand that emotion within the context of your spouse's world. So, sweetheart, I know you were really looking forward to going to that event. I know this must be really frustrating that the dress is at the dry cleaner. Okay, so saying that you recognize the emotion, but within the context of the world within which your spouse is operating. Now, obviously, you'd need to know what that context is. You can't simply make it up. But once you know someone and have a level of intimacy with them, and you know a little bit about their backgrounds, you can start figuring out their world and how that emotion fits in. Now, the responses in the middle are typically receptive silence, sympathy, I'm sorry, oh dear, those kind of answers. Now, I think the point is that in the business world, we tend to go straight for the problem solving. Straight for the problem solving. What's the problem? The problem is we don't have addressed. Let's go fix that. Before we start thinking about the emotional context within which that problem falls. And actually understanding that emotional context is absolutely key to solving that problem well. I'll give you one example. One of my first projects at McKinsey, I was working with a Swiss bank, private bank CEO. And the bank was struggling with profitability. This was shortly after the internet boom of the early part of the last decade went to bust. And the bank was struggling with profitability. I thought the objective was simply to get the bank profitable again. I was sitting with the CEO. He was looking very frustrated. And I asked him a simple question. So how are you feeling right now about the bank and your team? And it led into a 2-hour discussion about, actually, you know what? There is a problem with the bank, but the bigger problem is with my team. And it's with my chairman. And if I can't get that fixed, I'm not going to get anywhere. So as a consultant, if I'd been focusing only on the content, I would have missed the vast majority of what he was actually trying to solve for. And you know, we talked today, I think Rich mentioned and a few other people mentioned, looking at a problem from multiple perspectives. Really filling in the full dimensions of the problem. This is one way in which you can do that, by understanding the emotional context. To give you the analogy, it's a bit like music. So if you think about a piano, you can play wonderful music just with the white keys, but it really starts going when you have the white and the black keys, right? It's that richness. Because in every human interaction, there's a content dialogue taking place. But there's also an emotional dialogue taking place. So look, I'm standing in front of you right now, and there's a content dialogue. I'm explaining this musical analogy. There's also an emotional dialogue. What do you think my emotional state is right now? Sorry? Fear. Yeah, you know, it's actually right. There is some fear. I always have this as a McKinsey consultant, talking to people about empathy. I do fear. Yeah, I feel like, you know, they're going to be looking at me saying, who the hell are you to tell us about empathy? Yeah, there is a fear. What's the emotional, what emotional state are you in right now? Paul?
Fear that you might fall on it.
Which goes back to the entire discussion about intimacy and the grapple that we have with intimacy. Okay? So the only thing I wanted to say with this example here of the black dress. In general, in business, we immediately latch onto this. The first thing we do is problem solve. And you know, at the end of the day, we have to problem solve. In business, there are problems, we need to solve them. There is, though, incredible opportunity for exploring the emotional space, right? By just recognizing that it's there, calling it out, not judging it, but just calling it out, and then coming back and solving the problem at hand. Let me just pause and get some reflections. Any reflections? Yeah.
Just a very quick story. My daughter, Nicole, was 6, and I was talking to her about something, and she said to me, Dad, you
You know, it's a great example, and I had this situation actually with my younger daughter, a slightly more tragic story. Daughter 3 years old, my first daughter Maya, wonderful little princess, had a problem with her hearing for most of her young life, went from one specialist to the other, ended up with the final specialist in the Netherlands who could tell us what was going on. The young lady sits next to us and says, look, I'm sorry to tell you, your daughter's lost 30% of her hearing. It's not going to get any better. And I know how you're feeling right now, but things will get better over time. You'll get used to it. And I stood there saying, you tell me how I'm feeling? Do you have any idea how I'm feeling? It was really a shocker. Like just that notion of like someone else knowing how you feel. Yeah? Let's get some more thoughts on this. I know this could be a difficult topic because, as you all said, intimacy is not your strong suit. But don't be afraid. See, that's a level 1 response. Don't be afraid because... Takeshi.
I was thinking exactly the same things. Number 4 and number 5 are really critical. At the same time, we really need to have the authenticity, and we need to have spend the time. Otherwise, people get in that wrong way. And I think this is really, really important thing when we think about the intimacy.
That's great. And what you touch on is authenticity. So the last thing I'd like you to do is to go away from this and think it's some kind of a Jedi mind trick. It's kind of like, oh, I'm in this situation. Okay, I'm going to ask this question, and suddenly the relationship will become intimate. If you look at this as a tool that you can manipulate, it's not going to work. In fact, I once had a case recently where someone walked away from a discussion with this and he said, it doesn't work. I said, now, Paul, what are you talking about? Why doesn't it work? He said, well, I tried it on my wife. And she slapped me in the face. And I said, well, was it authentic, or did you just kind of pull it out of the toolkit when you thought it was appropriate? And say, well, actually, that's a good point. So it needs to be authentic, and ultimately it goes back to curiosity. If you are curious about the other human being sitting in front of you, if you're curious to find about their world, this is one way in which you can do it. If it's a Jedi mind trick, don't even try it, because it'll be smoked out. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. In my job, I work for a company called Schneider Electric, and they make everything from the power plant to the plug socket. And they're moving from being this product-focused company into the solutions offering and how they sell. And one of the things that we've positioned is seek to understand before being understood. And it was a nice story. We went to Bentley at Crewe, where they make Bentley cars.
Right.
And the guy there was about to sell some kit. And when he started being curious about what he was actually going to be attaching this kit to, it was a water jet that sprayed onto the bonnet, and it was how, or for the Americans here, the hood.
The hood.
How it landed up being, I mean, Bentley's is just beautifully made.
Yeah.
And when they started to getting into that, they realised that there was a massive problem in this. It was vibrations issues. It was costing them fortunes. And when they started to get engaged and this intimacy started to build up between the production manager and our sales guy, they could really see, and he started unloading his year to 2 years issues around this. We were able to sell a solution that was, the value that it had to him was so much more than we ever would have gone if we'd just gone in with the silver bullet problem solve.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that just a minute, and let me just illustrate with one example the importance of understanding the full scale of the problem. So let's say your friend is a fisherman. My artistic skills haven't developed since I was about 2, but let's say your friend is a fisherman and he's struggling to catch fish. His hook has fallen off, and he comes to you and says, hey, what should I be doing? I'm not catching any fish. What would you say?
I would say,
what's your hook look like? Yeah, so that's the immediate reaction. Now, if you take a step back and explore the full dimensions of this problem, so imagine I'm now going to go zooming out from this problem to somewhere bigger and actually explore what's going on. Actually, what I see is a factory here that's producing all kinds of chemicals that's going into the water. Now suddenly, what's the problem? Where are you fishing? There may not be any fish. Now let me zoom out even further. And actually, here's the Victoria Falls, and there's a huge rock at the end of it. What's the problem here? It's not even about fishing now. It's not even about the water. It's about get the paddle out and start paddling in the other direction. But it just goes to illustrate that the problem that we see at first sight may actually not be the problem at all. And you know, one of the biggest tragedies that I've seen in consulting is brilliantly solving the wrong problem. Right? So you spend a whole load of time and effort brilliantly solving the wrong problem. The worst bit of that is you give people hope that there is a solution. And in actual fact, a couple of years later, you come back and actually you haven't solved the problem. So this framework over here about understanding the emotional context is just one way in which you can start going from this is the immediate problem at hand to let me zoom out and actually understand the full breadth of the problem in all its richness. Yeah.
Something I find really interesting, you've raised it
Yeah.
there with that picture, is that you didn't have enough information.
Yeah.
And if you go straight to empathizing, it's maybe fine if it's your spouse because you would know how they respond. But in a business context, you can't assume that you actually know what they're feeling. And it's only if you get more information, so i.e. stage 3,
Yeah.
that you can get
That's
to
right.
stage 5.
That's right. Yep.
So, and I think that you've illustrated that perfectly with that. But it does mean that you can't go straight to empathy. You do have to start with the questions.
So that's absolutely right. And in my experience, as you start trying out stages 3, 4, and 5, if you put it out there, usually people will tell you if you've gone too far. If you go out there and people say, yeah, you know, I'm not feeling that great, but anyway, let's get back to the problem and see how we can solve it, they'll pull you back. But unless you actually invite them to go there, you will never end up there. And that's where it takes courage, right? And that's where it takes overcoming that fear of intimacy. Because if you never offer it to someone, it won't actually ever be there. There's one question in the back, yeah.
I don't know if it's okay to say this, Arthur and I had a conversation in the coffee break in which Arthur was saying that the paradigm in consultancy is to, when he goes and visits a new client, not to speak to them for a week until they've done the site visit thing. So I was wondering if you could respond to that. Okay.
So it's about actually doing the site visits and really grasping what's going on. Yeah? Yeah, so, you know, I love that approach. In McKinsey, we had a very different problem-solving approach. So we were trained from the first moment, before you've even seen the client or heard about their problem, figure out what the hypothesis is, and then go and actually try and test that hypothesis. Now, what happens, and you showed it perfectly today, when the hypothesis is given by typically the most senior person on the team, which is the way it works. I mean, that's why you bring in the seniors, because they've seen the problem before. The team ends up justifying the hypothesis, right? So I think there's a tremendous benefit in saying, let's put our hypotheses to the side. Let's recognize all the assumptions and beliefs that we're bringing in. Let's put them to the side. Let's go out there and sense. And you know, this is where design thinking and some of the stuff that we do on PFPS at Berkeley is so critical. It's about really putting ourselves out of the equation and trying to understand what other people really need. So I think there's a tremendous value.
Just to clarify,
Yeah.
PFPS is the problem framing class.
Yeah, problem framing class, yeah. And I see that I've got Leslie flirting in the most beautiful manner, so a few more questions, yeah, and then we'll stop. No, it's really interesting because I see a lot of people who sense the emotion. and they literally end up like deer in the headlights. You can see that they're there, and it's like, I don't know what to do with this. And they don't know how to process it. So I think for them, it's about giving them a way of thinking about it. So I think that's one option. I think for others, it's about just helping to instill the mindset that this is important. But you're right, it gets wiped out of people's brains shortly after they enter the workplace. I saw it most tragically once at McKinsey. I had a young associate working with me, and we were supposed to be doing a call with a client, a conference call. The client hadn't called in after 10 minutes, so I said to the associate, look, could you just please phone him, find out what's going on? So I'm overhearing the conversation, and the associate saying, okay, we'll reschedule. So I said to him, so what happened? And he said, well, the client's in accident and emergency. His daughter just got run over, so we're rescheduling the call. I'm like, where is your humanity gone? Where is your humanity gone? And there's literally nothing like, oh, that must be awful. Oh, my God, this is terrible. Like, don't worry about the call. We'll figure that out. Just all gone, all disappeared. And McKinsey's quite extreme in that. We're very good at erasing that bit of people's DNA. But I'd argue in most professional organizations, and the survey showed it, I think your show of hands showed it as well, it's something that we find difficult. Okay, I think I'm out of time. I think Leslie's going to be all over me if I'm not careful. 3 minutes. Okay, so one or two last questions. Yeah.
Just, Dean Lyons was talking earlier on about, where's the box? Because we all want to think outside the box.
Yeah.
And my reflection, having heard this, is that this is actually quite a nice framework for the box. And I'll just give an example in my job. Part of my job is actually, I work in an investment hedge fund.
Mm-hmm.
So part of my job is to get money in through the door. So the kind of pitching to clients and getting investors through the door. And there's usually, for those of you not in finance, there's usually like a very standard set of procedure in terms of what they need from you, and do you tick their boxes, etc., etc. And when you go to investor meetings, it's kind of a little bit boring sometimes once you've been to one, because it's kind of very set. So we went to seek advice from kind of someone who's kind of made it and done it, because we're a startup, and he said, look, just scramble that procedure. If they want to have a face-to-face with you, that means they're interested in you. So rather than telling them how you can make money for them, tell them about how you may lose money. Tell them about the risks in your strategy, because no investment strategy is going to be bulletproof. So tell them about the risks, because obviously the downside is just as important, if not more important, than the upside.
Right. So where in the trust equation would that fall? About credibility, reliability, intimacy, self-orientation.
I think self-orientation.
Yeah, it's about low self-orientation. It's about saying, this may not work out for you, and that's part of the risk of investing in a hedge fund.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. And once you do that, they actually, they let their guard down, and you actually.
And then you have a real discussion about what's your risk appetite. Do we fit into that risk appetite?
Well, generally, when they want a face-to-face with you, you know that you're within their
ballpark.
Yeah. So it's going beyond that. So
Good. One last question. Yeah.
When I look at that, I also
Yeah.
see if you're trying to get people on board for change.
Yeah.
Because the idea that you're saying, oh, don't worry, it's going to be okay, versus you're really nervous about this, let's
Yeah.
see how we can address those concerns. So
Yeah, absolutely. In a change journey, being completely open and honest about that is absolutely key, and being able to connect into the emotion, because there is a lot of fear. Any change triggers a counter reaction, which is often fear in people, right? So, very good. Thank you very much.